1 year, 5 months, 18 days, and 38 seconds is about how long it took for us to complete this entryway table.
You might be asking, why?
Because trying new things can be hard. We didn't do this because it was easy, but because we thought it would be. I might just be the worst woodworker on YouTube.
How are we gonna fix this? Well, we need to start at the beginning.
It all started with this walnut slab and enough knowledge to be dangerous. As the good book says, knowledge puffs up, and a fool left to his own folly is a danger to us all. So if the mistakes from my last table build were due to an unearned confidence, a sense of knowledge that only served to puff up my ego and not my skill level, then this table is about underconfidence and overcoming one's fear of looking like a fool. Oh, look, dinner.
That is nasty, Joseph.
I'm gonna say something controversial and probably not true. No one wants to look like a fool. I at the very least choose to believe this. Whether or not people try to prove me wrong is a whole nother thing. There are things in life worth looking foolish for. But being one is certainly not on my to-do list, regardless if what I showed you today says otherwise. At this point in the project, I was still in the stage that I like to call, I have a plan. I felt pretty confident in my napkin paper plan after overcoming my last learning opportunities. Oh, just so you know, that's what we're going to call mistakes from this moment forward. A learning opportunity, or knowledge gained. We'll play it by ear. Here's when things started to go wrong. So I decided to do 2 projects at one time. Not a horrible idea on the surface,
but I decided to do something that I've never done before.
A 2-layer epoxy pour, which starts to complicate things. Word of advice, if you're going to roll the dice on a new process, try it out on one project first. It's one thing to be foolish, but it's another thing for your plans to turn against you. More on that in a minute. The second layer is going to be uncolored epoxy. For some reason, we tried to use tape to create a dam rather than use caulking. I don't know what to say. It sounded reasonable at the time. And it failed, in case you're wondering. I can only go for so long before I get hit with a learning opportunity. Or in this case, some knowledge gained. The danger of doing 2 projects at the same time is, what happens when both projects start to fail? Well, in our case, you focus on project 1 and try to fix it, because that is the project that we are getting paid to make. Trying to fix and fixing are 2 different things. If you want to see how we fix project 1, link in the description. The project in this video was left to fend for itself.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
So unfortunately, we don't have much footage of the disaster that was happening with the entryway table. This was the first time I used just epoxy without any coloring, and I've learned you should always seal the wood before pouring clear epoxy. In jet black epoxy, any micro bubbles that appear won't be seen, but that is definitely not the case in clear epoxy. So I put this slab out of sight and out of mind for as long as I could. This brings us now to present day-ish. It's been well over a year since I've seen this slab, and I'm ready to get hurt again. And yet, I still found myself procrastinating all the way to the end of this build. It took me an additional 3 months and 18 days to complete this table. When I first started this channel, I really wanted to focus on trying to seem competent. Well, maybe competent isn't the right word, but I wanted it to seem like I always knew what I was doing. And 90% of the time, I do know what I'm doing. But there's always that 10% of unknown to me with every project that I do. As Mike Tyson once said, "Everyone has a plan till he gets punched in the mouth. I'm Mike Tyson." That is exactly what this project felt like. Multiple punches to the face. I always know that I'm going to make learning opportunities. It's pretty much a given. My personality type likes to see how close I can get to the danger zone. That's not some type of weird brag. I know it's foolish, and I fight against it every day. But it also works out so often for me that in the moment, dumb ideas actually sound halfway decent. And I could edit around that, but I've come to learn that's just not me. I would rather you learn what not to do from me than have to experience it yourself. My original plan was to try and sell this table. If I had somebody already lined up to buy it, I would have gone through the process of routing out the epoxy and repouring the epoxy. But the cost versus the return wasn't going to be high enough for me to want to make that type of investment. So I'm going to go ahead and just flatten the slab. And we'll see later if skipping all this additional work was a foolish idea. This metal sled has less resistance than one made of wood. This was my first time using the metal sled since I've made it. Semi-pro tip. When using a flattening jig, don't move too fast and don't try to remove all the material in one pass. Even though this is a horrible task and you want to get it done as soon as possible because you hate it, all you're going to do is leave yourself with hours and hours of extra work to do. It's just not worth it. I'm pretty sure I need to calibrate this sled to get a smoother result, but that is for another day. As I went ahead with what I know and removed any lines and any epoxy tear out with a lot of sanding at 60 and 80 grit. Also, this table is now going to the wife. So my trash now becomes the wife's treasure. I can't think of any better way of saying that.
Thanks, Joseph.
When you're trying to lay the foundation for the future, plenty of learning opportunities are going to be created. So embrace getting punched in the face over and over and over again. In saying that, this is not how I handled this project. Now, I don't take myself too seriously, especially when it comes to woodworking. This is at best a job and at worst a hobby. When it's my time to go, the last thing I'm going to be thinking about is I wish I wouldn't have made this or that mistake with a table. But during the build of this table, I was acting like I would. I started to hyper focus on all of the mistakes. And as mistakes started to pile up, I couldn't help but think, man, I am a fraud. The feeling seems to be compounded by the fact that I am recording this project. What I'm saying right now is foreshadowing. We are not at the hurt yet. Making a jig in combination with using a thickness planer to flatten wood is within the realm of the 90% of things I know how to do, that I spoke about earlier. Semi-pro tip. When flattening boards, account for the fact that the front of the board might not be the high spot. I like this wind thickness planer, but I was pushing it to its limit with this aggressive pass. I've said it before in a previous video that I'm still kind of new to Texas. I'm not new to the South, but for the last 17 years, I was living in Oregon, and humidity was not really a thing I had to deal with. In saying all that, normally no matter what, it's a good idea to plane the boards to rough size the first day, and then come back and do your final passes on the second day. For me, I waited 25 days. This was mainly due to a failed root canal, but that's not the full reason. I honestly really don't want to show these next parts. It's one thing to be thought of as a fool, and it's another thing to remove all doubt. This is probably most definitely not gonna make me look good. It's gonna make me look bad. But here we go. I used my CNC to make some templates for these legs based off of the material that I had at hand. This is the 4th time that I've ever built legs for a table. Normally, I just buy them, but that's not going to get me to where I want to be as a woodworker. In saying that, that is not how I felt when I was making these legs. It was more like, you suck, and now everyone's going to see how dumb you are. You should definitely stop making YouTube videos. I can tend to be pretty harsh with myself, more than any comment section could be. Unfortunately, these legs aren't all straight cuts, as there's a slight arch in the design of these legs. So that means I have to go to a tool that I never like to use. So back in the day, I had the money to either buy a CNC or a bandsaw. And most days, I don't regret buying the CNC. But for days like this, I really wish I had a bandsaw, as I equally hate the jigsaw and suck at using it. Especially this older Ryobi jigsaw that I have that doesn't self-lock into its labeled 0 degree. I don't know if any jigsaws do this, but it would be a nice feature. Semi-pro tip, make sure your tool is actually set up correctly before you use it. With this jigsaw, you kind of have to eyeball it and look for the little mark here and the degree markings here. From there, you have to try to line everything up and then lock it into place. Hopefully you did this correctly so the jigsaw won't cut at a slight angle. I just assumed that it was set up correctly. It was not, which led to these results. To be fair to the jigsaw, it wasn't just the tool that caused this, it was user error. I know that I need to take it slow when using a jigsaw to prevent the blade from curving too much. But I also hate this tool so much that my patience only lasts so long. Not the worst mistake in the world, but it does come back to hurt me a little bit later. But more on that later. To create the joints where the leg pieces meet up, I'm going to use an L fence and my table saw. Before I get deeper into the ugly, I'm just going to acknowledge the fact that I should have built this jig that 4 Eyes Furniture does each time he makes these type of cuts. Clearly in saying that, that is not what I did. I had fallen so far behind on getting this project done, so I turned to what I already knew, which I eventually realized was not that safe. To make matters worse, the top of my table saw had some rust on it that was causing the wood to drag every time I made a pass. It's never a good idea to rush to get anything done, especially when that includes a table saw and your fingers. I honestly did not remember doing this until I rewatched this footage. This is very dumb. My urgency to get this project done outweighed my common sense. It also being a very hot day didn't help the situation. This isn't a clip people would normally show because clearly this does not make me look good. Again, this was beyond foolish to do, and I don't think I can stress that enough. But I wanted to pass this on to you as a learning opportunity. It's worth any amount of flack that I'm probably going to get in the comment section for this. As long as you learn something from this, or should I say more correctly, as long as we both learn from this. Thankfully, my better judgment kicked in and I stopped my idiocracy and took care of the rust as a first step. Humidity in the Houston, Texas area can quickly rust a cast iron top. If you have any amount of moisture on your hand or your body and you accidentally touch the cast iron top, the next morning, you're going to wake up to rust. Once I had the surface sanded and cleaned, I went ahead and buffed on some wax and then let it dry. The wax I added to the surface will help it from rusting too much in the future, but this is something that I will need to maintain. And it also makes for a much smoother and safer cut. I also waxed the L fence to reduce any friction. I made sure to use the miter gauge with each cut and take my time with each pass. It was definitely safer after this, but not as safe as I would like it to be in hindsight. Again, in the future, I'm going to be going with the 4 Eyes method to make these cuts. Now, this is where I would like to tell you that things got better. But now it's time to glue all these joints up. For alignment purposes, I'm going to be using my Festool domino. Okay, you got me. I don't have a Festool domino, but I do have a Dowling jig, and it's basically the same thing if you close your eyes and squint real hard. So I'm actually trying to learn from my past. I went ahead and did a test glue up off camera because I needed a win, as I'm pretty sure I've lost any credibility that I previously possibly had. So if you made it this far into the video, thank you. And why don't you thank yourself by hitting that subscribe button. I would consider this my first real build project in like 10 months. Woodworking is not like riding a bike. If you don't keep up with it, you will lose some of the knowledge you've gained from previous builds. Or maybe that's just me. I quickly went to panic mode while doing this glue up. I felt like my glue up plan fell apart right away. Looking at the footage now, it doesn't look that bad, But at the moment, it seemed like the clock was ticking and I needed to decide which wire to cut to save us all. To make matters worse, apparently, I didn't delete the footage I've already recorded from my phone, and I was running low on space while trying to record this glue up.
Sure. And how much have I recorded the other part? This is not really good. This is so bad.
Having a plan is one thing, but the reality of me making it work is a whole nother thing. Doing a simple glue up is hard enough for me. Add in trying to film it, and clearly, I am not worthy. I thought doing a glue up off camera, stress-free, would make for a better glue up on camera. But clearly, I was wrong. It's really easy to let a day turn into a week, and then a week turn into a month, when you're trying your best to put things off. And that is exactly what I did with these legs. I was putting this off for two very, very good reasons. I knew this next step would invite some level of failure, so I found any excuse that I could to not get back in the shop. I knew that once I start cutting into this wood, it now becomes real, and all the things that I was worried about will become a reality. It was that little voice in the back of my mind just constantly chipping away at whatever confidence that I had left. On a much lighter note, the other force delaying me was simply knowing that I was about to create a giant mess. I normally use 1/4 inch thick MDF to make templates, and for smaller projects, I still will. But on larger projects like this one, I'm thinking about switching to 1/2 inch MDF. Because without fail, I always seem to damage my templates, either with the router or by working harder and not smarter. 1/2 inch will give me more room for error. Or, I could pay more attention to what I'm doing and not start the router until I have it in position. That too is also a good option. I got a little cavalier with the bottom of these legs and decided to test out just using the router bit and the template to cut them out. And surprisingly, it actually worked. But in the future, I'm going to stick to using my track saw to make these type of cuts, as I know I'm just asking for a mistake to happen. I know I've been covering a lot of bad and ugly moments with this project, and I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer. There is the occasional good moment that I feel like I need to share with you as well. Rather than try to do math or measure, because at this point, do you think that would work out for me? I made sure to include drill locations on the templates for the stretcher pieces that I plan to add to these legs. Using a drill bit and this doweling jig, I was able to perfectly drill the holes. Some days I do work smarter and not harder. But not to get full of myself, I then turned around and broke my template. I should have been using this little beehive scraper to pry them off, which I did after this. After that moment of good, we need to go ahead and switch focus back to the bad. The template pattern bit that I was using was relatively new. This Ryobi one though, not so much. I've had this bit for years now, and I'm pretty sure at this point, it's no longer sharp. I remember thinking to myself, if I get a little tear out, not a big deal. I'll fix it later.
I don't know why I continue to do this to myself, knowing it's going to cost me extra time and extra work.
It's one of those things where in the moment it sounded great, so it wasn't very surprising that I had a big chunk of the wood break off. I probably should have trimmed back the material that was left to prevent this. The only tool that I could think of doing this with is the jigsaw, and seeing and knowing how that went before, I decided against the jigsaw. Some glue and painter tape will solve this problem. But that wasn't the only tear out that I had. But this one will require another type of fix. More on that later. At this moment, I couldn't help but to think of the channel Woodworking, as he sells a trim router base and a trim back attachment that would help with this mess. And by help, I mean eliminate it in the first place. Thankfully, Christmas is only a few months away. I know I'm not done with the router at this point, so I'm going to create even more of a mess, and that hurts. The greatest hurt is knowing that I'm always going to have to clean up this mess myself. So I did something that needed to be done, and I bought a new flush trim router bit to remove that newly glued on chunk of wood. I was pretty excited for this, but that was my mistake. I might just be the worst woodworker on YouTube. This is embarrassing, but also I found it pretty funny, so I'm just gonna show it. I don't know why the wood glue just popped off like that, so I decided CA glue was the way to go. But before returning to the router, I did the smart thing and cut off the excess wood. Okay, I am the worst woodworker on YouTube. So I went ahead and super glued it back on again before using the pull saw to remove the rest of the material. It didn't come out pretty, but after using the new flush trim router bit, a little wood filler, and sanding, you won't be able to notice.
That looks like crap.
It's still better to have this chunk of wood in there than no wood at all. It also helps to know that I will be staining the legs black, so let's go ahead and call this a moral victory and move forward. Now I get to do some sanding to get the legs ready for some profiles. It took me and the wife a few days to decide on the profile for these legs. I wanted to buy a new router bit for this, but then she saw how much I paid for that new flush trim router bit, and then we decided it was better to just use what we already have. While we were deciding the leg profiles, I went ahead and made some stretcher pieces to be able to connect the legs together. To not lose you in this next part, here's some terminology for the next few steps. This is the bottom stretcher pieces, and this is the somewhat hidden stretcher pieces, but they also will be referred to as the top stretcher pieces. Okay, now that you know that information, let's continue. For the exposed stretchers at the bottom of the legs, we're going to be attaching that with just glue and dowels. I try to drill the holes similar to how I did the legs. I even made these templates. I was able to clamp the doweling jig to the stretcher, but the clamp got in the way of the drill. And at this moment, I had no brain cells left to figure out a better way of doing this. I could have cut out more templates and then glued them together to create a drill guide, but that's in hindsight. In the moment, I just used the one template and tried to drill as straight as I could. Was it perfect? No. Is there a better solution? Yeah, I just named one, and there's probably a bunch more. Feel free to leave comments below with your ideas, because I could use them. At this point in the build, I have fully moved on from my worries of looking like a fool in this video. That ship has sailed. My concern now is getting this project done. Self-doubt is still there, but the urgency to finish this project is what's weighing on my mind now, which creates its own type of mistakes. For the somewhat hidden stretcher pieces, I went ahead and took the time to measure and drill holes for the screws that will be used to connect the top to the legs. I might have said this already, but I'm trying to put more focus on using this build to lay the foundation for future success, which means that I will still definitely have some knowledge gain moments. And look, here's one of those moments right now. The pocket holes I drilled out will not be visible once the tabletop is on the legs. But I also bored out the holes for the screws on the same side as the pocket holes, making those holes I just created useless. Since I don't have any extra material to remake these pieces, we're just gonna roll with it. My only comfort is knowing that this mistake could happen to anyone. This may require me to get longer screws, but we'll have to see about that. I hope I don't have to spend any more money because I already have plenty of screws and no desire to buy more. I added a light curve to the front of the legs with the goal of keeping that crisp line down the edge. For the inside of the legs, I kept it very simple and just added a 1/4 inch roundover. Well, to most of the inside of the leg. Do you remember that tear out from earlier that came out of nowhere? That moment right here. Well, unfortunately, it was on the front facing side of the legs. I took the easy button approach to removing the tear out. It wasn't a 100% fix, so wood filler was required. Since this table is for my house, I decided, let's experiment. I do not know what I'm doing here. This is me completely winging it. For some reason, unbeknown to me, I own a hand rasp and file. Is it for wood? I have no idea. Did I try my best to look like I knew what I was doing here? Yes. And that can take you farther in life than we should all really be comfortable with. I spent one day sanding to get everything ready for stain. I made sure to hand sand around the front curves of the legs, to make sure I didn't round over any of the straight edges with the sander that I wanted to stay intact. Even though I desperately just want to be done with this project at this point, I'm taking my time, as I don't want to ruin my design just because I want this project done. I'm trying to get better and learn for myself each day. But don't let a good day distract you from the failure that's to come. As this leads me back to a glue up day, which I purposely decided to make its own day, as I did not want to rush this process. For the top stretcher pieces, I made sure to mark the location of where they would be attached and find the middle of the stretcher pieces themselves. I have a glue up plan. I know what you're asking. Who is this person planning all of this out? This cannot be Joseph. It's like that saying, if you plan to fail, you're failing to plan. In saying that, things mostly went to plan. More on that in a minute. And because I've already sanded the surface in preparation for stain, I brought some tools to try and reduce any after glue sanding that will need to be done. So that concludes the easy part of this glue up. Let's get to that mostly went to plan part now. In theory, I understood the fact that I needed to attach both of the stretcher pieces to one of the legs at the same time. And then I needed to attach the other section of the leg to those stretchers. But it wasn't until I actually started doing it that I realized the urgency in which I needed to get this done. And that's when I started to lose my cool. I know it may look like I'm calm at this moment, but trust me, I am freaking out on the inside. I'm starting to realize I am never going to have an unstressful glue up. I have a general idea of what I'm doing here, but like I said before, looking like you know what you're doing can take you far in life, for better or worse. Once I had the bottom stretchers attached to both of the legs, I realized I haven't added any glue to the top section pieces, and then started to panic even more. I thought it was clever of me to use two phones to record this, but that only works when you actually hit the record button on your phone, which I didn't realize I didn't do. I mean, I have this other shot of me, but you can't really tell what's going on. You're gonna have to trust me that I put glue in every spot that needed it. It was not the prettiest glue up, but pretty isn't exactly in my wheelhouse. But in the end, I got her done. The straw and the wet cloth did an amazing job in helping me remove any glue squeeze out to help reduce my post glue up sanding time. Reduce, not eliminate. My original plan was to put a board on top of these bottom stretcher pieces to act as a shelf. The wife was originally down with this plan until she realized I don't have any more ash and I would need to buy some more. Then she told me she liked the table just the way it was, without the shelf, and didn't want to spend any more money. And that's when I fell in love with her all over again. I really don't know why I decided to stain these legs rather than do something like spray them with a black lacquer. This thought didn't come to my mind until I actually started staining these legs, and I remembered how much I don't like staining wood, especially with all the surface area that these legs have. Who am I kidding? Spraying this would probably not end well for me. I think I made the right choice. So we're about to enter the Twilight Zone, where before the wife was like, no, don't spend any money. And I was like, I love you for that. We need to spend some money now. I actually did something surprising and went ahead and did a test piece. This is the results that you get if you use the Rubio black stain and the pure finish. No bueno. So I went behind my wife's back, which is normally a bad idea. I ordered a teeny yet also expensive bottle of Rubio in the color charcoal. And I think I made the right call, as I wanted really black legs for this table and not some type of muddy dirt black. If you're trying to get a deep black with Rubio, just know you're going to need to do the black stain first and then do the charcoal finish and not the black finish, which is somewhat confusing and very pricey because that stain ain't cheap. In woodworking, assuming is a dangerous game. I assumed where the high spot was when planing the wood. I assumed that the jigsaw was set up correctly. And I assumed that this tabletop had one flat edge. It did not. That's what happens when you assume. It makes a donkey out of you and me. Or in this case, just me. This was a complete lack of judgment and a learning opportunity. This step was always meant to be done with the track saw first, and then the table saw. This right here might just be the most expensive scrap wood I have ever made. It has to be at least worth $1 million billion zillion. Before I can go ahead and route some profiles on this table, I need to get the okay from the wife. The bottom profile was easy. She said no more than 45-degree angle and as deep as your router bit can go. But for the top profile, that took a little bit more work to get the wife to decide. She said she wanted a very slight round over, and then she said this was good, but then went and said maybe something else. But I was like, if you want to keep it, okay, maybe a little more. Then she was like, you decide. And then I was like, okay, here's this photo of a little bit more. And then she was like, oh yeah, that, I want that. So that's what I did. This is about a 1/4 inch round over, which was the original round over that I wanted to add to the top. So that worked out for me. But once I got the go ahead, I was off and running and then back to sanding shortly after. I was all ready to add finish, and then I realized I have not added the threaded inserts to the bottom of this slab yet. Now you probably could get away with adding the threaded inserts once you have the table finished, but I don't trust myself. If I accidentally scratch the top of the surface, I would rather do it now than after I apply finish, because ain't nobody want to refinish a table. As I start adding the threaded inserts, you'll notice that I didn't countersink the holes that I just drilled, and that will leave the threaded inserts proud of the surface, and I have a reason for this. Firstly, I didn't want to drill the hole too deep and potentially expose it in the epoxy. As if you recall, only half of the table is black epoxy. Secondly, if you recall, I bored out some holes on the wrong side of the stretcher pieces, and because of that, I don't have to worry about this tabletop not sitting flush because I didn't countersink the holes. So I didn't find it necessary to do this extra step. This brings us back to Texas and humidity. Even though I've been in Texas for a couple years now, I have actually not tried to apply Rubio during the summertime in humidity, which got me to think, can I? In my desire to look more professional, I looked up the recommended applying temperature and humidity for Rubio. This made me realize that I was going to have to apply the Rubio late at night, when the temperature and the humidity went down, which explains the poor lighting situation I found myself in. The crazy thing is, when the temperature went down, the humidity started to go up, which is completely messed up. With walnut, a single coat of Rubio is never enough. So a few days later, I hit the surface with a maroon pad and applied a second coat of Rubio. Now I again get to wait for the finish to cure, which is a good thing for me because it allows me time to edit this video. If you hadn't watched the journey to make this table, you would have never known just how poorly of a woodworker I am. Yet I still was able to accomplish my goal and make this table. And just like that, all of my worries and fears, me panicking to get this project done, is all but a memory. The wife has an entryway table, and I'm ready to repeat this cycle again with the next project. So the question still lingering is, how did the tabletop turn out? Well, if you shine a light on the side of the table, you can definitely see air bubbles. But if anyone asks, this is a Galaxy table. Doing the clear coat over the black was pretty pointless in the end, at least for this type of project. It just looks like black epoxy. After 1 year, 5 months, and 18 days, through all the bad and the ugly, after all the punches to the face that I delivered to myself, I have completed this project.
So don't give up, learn from your mistakes and mine, as iron sharpens iron. I'm Joseph with 5 Duck Studio. Hope to see you next time. Wouldn't be the same without you. I don't know why I did that.